Today on Comm Talk, we're talking about the newest member of the X-Men franchise, The Gifted. Stick around!
Captain, we have a proximity alert with the planet Geekery. We are approaching collision.
Quicks, get somebody on the comms, enter in the security code.
257.
Security code accepted.
Hello, devoted geeks, and welcome to episode 23 of Comm Talk, the podcast extension of Geek Devotions, the YouTube show from a couple devoted geeks that are devoted to letting people know that they are loved. I am Dallas, and with me is...
Celeste! Today we will be discussing some of what we like about The Gifted and how we want to see it play out in the X-Men verse. As you listen to this podcast, please interact with us. Send us your thoughts on what we're saying via Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find us simply by looking up Geek Devotions. Do us a favor and leave a review on iTunes. And leave some comments and interact with us on social media. And perhaps you can be our devoted geek of the month.
Before we get into today's topic, we have a few announcements for you guys. First off, last week our friend Josh from Victims and Villains podcast had us on his show. And we talked about Lion King, we talked about Shazam, and we talked about some pretty deep stuff. Victims and Villains is a suicide prevention podcast. He deals with some pretty heavy things, but it's all a matter to bring hope to people who are in need of that kind of hope. And so I want to encourage you guys, check him out, Victims and Villains. It's on pretty much all your favorite podcast catchers. He's got a website that's out there, and he's got all kinds of great resources for you to be able to get the help you need if you need some help. And so check that out. It was a lot of fun. Josh is a great guy, and we really appreciate all that he does.
We also wanted to let you know that we now have a group on Facebook called Devoted Geek Life. It's a lot of fun, a lot of geekery, a lot of discussion, and sometimes we even hold polls to deal with our podcast to get your input and opinions.
Speaking of polls, stick around to the end of our podcast as you'll be hearing the results from this week's poll from Devoted Geek Life, where we asked our fellow Devoted Geeks, what is your favorite mutant power from established X-Men TV series and movies? And why, if you have an answer for that. So stick around, we'll be at the end of today's podcast. So let's get into today's topic. If you haven't seen The Gifted, the summary for it on the Wikipedia page for it is: two ordinary parents, Reed and Caitlin Strucker, take their family on the run from the government when they discover their children, Lauren and Andy, have mutant abilities, and they join an underground community of mutants who have to fight to stay alive. So that's the general plot line of the series. So let's break it down. Let's talk about a little bit in depth about what the series is like and some aspects that we like about the show. So Celeste, tell me first off, what is it that you like about the show?
I think that I like that it's such a different take on the X-Men world. Mm-hmm. You know, all the other shows, we follow the X-Men and it deals with everyone hates the X-Men, and that's still the case, but it shows a different perspective. It shows someone who didn't have the chance to go to Xavier's. Right. And learn how to handle things and to be a hero. These are just ordinary people. Right. Running from the law.
Yeah. I can see that. And it's an interesting take on itself in the fact that it starts off Reed Strucker, the parent, the father. He's actually a prosecutor. Yes. For the government. In this universe, they set up that if you use your mutant powers and anybody gets hurt at all, it's automatically a crime. And so this is what he does for a living. And as it comes out, his daughter Lauren is a mutant. But she's been a mutant for a while. She's known about her powers, and she's actually trained herself how to use them. Mm-hmm. And so where everything comes to a head is when her little brother Andy manifests his powers after a pretty intense bullying scene.
Yeah. Well, and I think that I like the differences in their powers. Mm-hmm. Because Lauren kind of shields. She takes the air and forms a shield. Mm-hmm. Whereas Andy just kind of causes chaos. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that their powers play off of each other. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And it's quite interesting, the family dynamic as they go through this also. Yes. Andy is obviously a pretty troubled young man in the series. Yeah. And Lauren's, I don't know, you kind of get the feeling in the front end that she's like the, got it all together, not quite prissy, but, super girly girl type of individual.
Yeah.
And then, but you could tell she cares about her brother.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's what I like about it is the fact that throughout the series, she really, because she cares about her brother, tries to take care of him, tries to take care of the family. And it seems to be a rarity in television nowadays where you see family units really working together like this, coming together during adversity. And it's not, we're just slamming one parent or another.
At the same time, I feel like they've done a pretty good job of showing how the parents are handling this. There was a scene in, and spoilers for anybody if anybody hasn't seen this, but there was a scene in one of the episodes where Caitlin was trying to find books to give these kids, these mutant children, some sense of normalcy. Help them to finish their degrees or their high school degrees.
Right.
And somebody goes, "Why are you doing this?" She's like, "They need some normalcy." And they go, "This is their normal." And you can kind of see it in her face that she's like, "Oh my God, this is their normal."
Right.
And because at the time, at the way things are going with this show, there's really no need for conventional schooling. They need to know how to protect themselves.
But at the same time, even with that scene that you're talking about, Caitlin's mindset wasn't a matter of they're trying to defend themselves. What she's seeing is a character named Polaris training child soldiers. And so, and even Polaris, when she asked Polaris what she was doing, it wasn't I'm trying to teach these kids how to defend themselves. She was, I'm preparing them for war, which is an interesting take. We have the privilege of living in a country where we haven't had to fight to survive. We haven't had to do certain things growing up. But these are, there are kids across the world who are 12, 15, sometimes younger, who are having to fight. And so we look at them going, this is a tragedy. How these poor kids are being taught to fight. But for some of them, they live in areas where they have to learn to fight to survive, to live a normal life. I say normal life, normal for them. Yeah. They have to survive, and they have to learn to fight.
Well, I know that Polaris was meaning war, but my take on it was that she was teaching them to defend themselves. Sure. Because the Sentinels were coming after them, right, whether they did anything wrong or not. Yeah. So if they knew how to use their powers, then they could defend themselves and hopefully not hurt anybody.
Right, absolutely. So, and the Sentinels themselves are an interesting aspect. They're not the giant robots that we see in the movies or in the comics, but Sentinel Services is actually a kind of a branch of the government. And so they're all people. They have some technologies they use. They use to essentially gather up the mutants who are lawbreakers and either imprison them or do something else, which
we haven't figured out what do something else is yet.
Yeah, we haven't. It's been quite interesting.
We know that it's there. We don't know what it is.
So it's interesting though, because and I don't know. I'm looking at it from the point of view of, because I'm very intrigued by how does the government respond to certain things, and so I could see our government responding to a homegrown, what they perceive to be a threat, even though it's maybe not, and overreacting in this way. We have a history of that already in the past, like during World War II, we had, I forgot what exactly we called it here stateside, but essentially they were concentration camps for Japanese citizens.
Internment camps.
Yeah, internment camps. And for Japanese American citizens, because we were scared that they were
connected
to Japan and to the stuff. And quite frankly, with our current political climate, it's scarily to say that we may not be too far from that happening with some of the recent terrorist attacks happening stateside.
Exactly.
And so,
which would be a travesty because not everyone falls into those categories.
Exactly. And so it has a lot of deep political discussion, which has always been an aspect of X-Men universe, is the political side of it. But at the same time, it has some really great aspects of the family unit and them trying to work through their difficulties, try to understand it. There was a great scene in the one that we just saw where Reed and Andy are on this mission to break into a government building. Nothing says parent-child bonding like some breaking and entering. But
please don't break in and with your children.
But Reed's talking to Eclipse about being a parent. Eclipse just found out that he's going to be a dad a few episodes beforehand. And so he's like, were you ready to be a dad? And Reed says, I wasn't. And essentially he goes about saying that, all he knows is that no matter what happens, he knows that he will always love his son. No matter who his son is, no matter what his son does, no matter what situation the family falls in, he will have nothing but love for his son. And of course, the great journey is, as a parent, how do I respond now? How do I teach my child? How do I raise them up? So I appreciate the family aspect of this show probably above all.
Oh, and I do appreciate that they're not just focusing on the kids. They're not just focusing on the mutants. Mm-hmm. Because Reed and Caitlin are normal humans. Mm-hmm. They're not mutants.
Right.
Clearly, they do have some mutant genes, mm-hmm. genealogy. They have the X gene somewhere in them, enough to be able to pass it on to their children.
Right.
But that side of things, seeing the aspect of someone who is not a mutant mm-hmm. react to all these things that the mutants have, it's become normal.
Right. Well, then even speaking of the human side of things, you have the storyline with Jace, who is kind of the guy who's in charge of Sentinel Services, who's hunting down the mutants and hunting down this family specifically. And Jace's whole motivation is because there was this travesty that took place, I think it was about 5 years before the series starts, and where there was a mutant rally. They're fighting for their rights, and Jace is already in the government. He's already some sort of law enforcer, and he seems to be kind of on the fence as to about what to do about the mutants. And in the midst of the rally, there's something that goes on, and in front of him, he sees his little girl die because of a mutant ability that went awry. Now, what happened, what was the truth of that situation, we don't know, but that changed him. And so his motivation to handle the mutants, I don't think he's necessarily like, I'm going to kill the mutants, but he has this mindset of, I watched my little girl die because of these people. Now I am more cautious and worried about who mutants are.
Yeah.
And so you have this real interesting dynamic of, you have Reed and Caitlin who they knew the stories, but they didn't have any real close encounters. Mm-hmm. Reed had some encounters because he was of his job, and he saw some interesting things, but he thought he was legitimately helping them.
Yeah, he strikes me as someone who's very compassionate.
Exactly. And then when he saw his own kids as mutants, his mindset changed, and he's like, I've got to do something because I've been doing this wrong all along. I've been going about this the wrong way. I haven't been helping these mutants. I've been causing more harm. There has to be a better way. Whereas you have Jace, who is he thinks he's trying to take care of the world as a whole, and that mutants are just nothing but dangerous.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting dynamic you see, and the fact that they really make you sympathize for both of them in a very real way.
Well, and in the reality of this, if that were to ever happen, or in situations where similar things have happened, it's one of those things of there's a story to both sides.
Yeah.
You have to. There are still people to sympathize, even if they are not on the correct side of things.
Sure. There
are still people that truly believe they are doing what's right.
And I think that's something that everyone needs to think about in their own way. There are always two sides to every story. And when you're dealing with situations, you have to learn to take everyone's story into account before you can make a proper judgment. And even then, in those situations, there can be a foggy judgment of what you're supposed to do. I remember years ago, I was hearing a study that was done that said that you can have one accident take place, like a car accident take place, and you interview 5 different people who had different advantage points. And because of their advantage point, they saw something entirely different takes place. And that really is what happens in society. And then to add on to it, the manipulation by certain aspects of society. I remember years ago there was the discussion about there was a picture that came out, and it looked like a soldier holding a gun to a person's head. Well, then you change the angle and you realize he's not holding a gun to the person's head, but rather because of the angle, there was no soldier behind him who was holding a gun, and hit this guy whose hand was outreaching was actually holding out a water bottle to a person. And so, but the thing that got highlighted was the man with the gun, not the truth of it. And you see that aspect being played out in the series of, you know, the political play of like, okay, we want people to see this aspect of the mutants.
Yeah.
We want people to see this aspect of the government. And so you have all this coming in play, and I really feel like that's part of what the show is saying is stop for a second and really look at everything involved in the situation at hand. Well, now that we've talked about some aspects of the story we like, let's get down to some of our favorite characters, because that is a driving force in the series, are these really interesting characters. And so we're going to talk about 3 specific characters that Celeste and I really enjoy in the series itself. So Celeste, who's the first person we want to talk about?
Polaris! I love Polaris. Like, she's a little rough around the edges, but I really and truly do love her. She is tough. She takes care of business, but she really does care. Now, I think they're going to have some interestingness playing, because Polaris is the one who is having Eclipse's baby, which is ironic. But I think they're going to have some interesting, if they think about it, they're going to have some interesting side story going while she's pregnant, because pregnancy hormones in mutants, I'm sure, can cause interesting things. And I love the fact that, because we didn't know this, but apparently she is Magneto's daughter. She is one of them. So I feel like that is a setup to then pull in some other storyline people. Like, we may see Scarlet Witch or Quicksilver.
Yeah. We'll talk about some of that stuff that's coming down the line later in the show after the break that we're going to have. What is it about Polaris that you find so interesting, though?
I think it's that while she is hard and she does what has to be done, that she doesn't let it make her cynical. Like, she's not your happy-go-lucky character. She's not someone that is constantly smiling and joking around, but she has a sense of humor. She doesn't automatically take the well, we're just all doomed look to things. She has hope. Right. Even though you know that she has been through the ringer.
Yeah. And she has. I mean, just the first few episodes, she's been through some rough stuff already. And then, like you said, Hinette, she's the daughter of Magneto. And so if they play out the storyline, and for those of you listening, in this universe, the X-Men and the Brotherhood are missing. They're gone. We don't know where they're at. They were set, the Gifted centers around one particular group of mutants that they have safe houses around the nation. This particular safe house is being ran by John Proudstar, also known as Thunderbird, who is a Native American and also a veteran of the United States military. Yeah. Which, of course, is so much involved in that conversation alone. Right. But what's interesting about him, though, is the sense of responsibility he has for the group. And I really do appreciate that aspect of him. I appreciate the fact that they take time to show him trying to take time to understand every aspect. Like, you kind of see the wear and tear on him throughout the episodes, where he's really trying to balance out, okay, these are my decisions and how do they affect the group as a whole. And just kind of his upbringing as a former veteran and all these other things. I really appreciate this character and his leadership. And I think that he has the leadership qualities that are needed to lead an X-Men team. Yeah. Well,
and at one point, and I'm curious as to where they're going to take this story. Somebody said something about the X-Men wouldn't have chosen you. So that tells me that someone who was on Xavier's team went, hey, you have leadership qualities. I need you to step up and do this. Right. So I think he may have even, just because of what I'm seeing, he could have possibly even had contact with Xavier.
With Xavier, maybe.
Like, potentially training, because the school went on for a good while. So it could be that he was one of the original products of the school.
I don't know about that one. I don't know if he would have been. Just the way they've played out the last couple episodes, I'm not sure he was a student of the school for very long before everything kind of hit the fan. The doubt that he has to be able to lead the group, it tells me that he was pretty raw in this one before the X-Men left out. So, and I think that a lot of his leadership that he's counting on comes from his military training.
Oh, that's very possible. Certain aspects of his leadership remind me of a friend of ours who was in the military and leads similarly.
Yes, he does. And again, I appreciate the writing that took place into this character. I've seen Thunderbird in a few issues of the comics, and I've seen it in one movie only, and never quite in depth from what I've read about him until this series. And I feel like the writers, I'm curious the background of the writers, if they have themselves served in the military, because there are aspects about him that I'm like, that is our friend.
Yes.
So much.
So much.
So, all right. So the next character we kind of want to talk about, highlight, that we kind of enjoy is Blink.
Now, I'm looking at this, and Blink is not who I thought it was.
Oh no!
When I read that and I read Blink, I thought it was the guy who cuts the powers.
No.
Any system he can disrupt.
That's Pulse.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So in my head, I've been mentally preparing to talk about Pulse. I'm like, we just met him. How are we going to talk about him?
No, not Pulse.
I understand so much more now why we're talking about this.
Right. For those of you listening, Pulse was a character that we just met a couple episodes back, and he has this ability to disrupt systems. And specifically, he has the ability to also disrupt mutant abilities, which it was made for a very interesting episode. You guys all have to check that out. But no, we're talking about Blink, who is her character's name is Clarice Fong, and she has the ability to create these portals that she can jump through and basically teleport from one place to another place. So with some caveats, she really, really prefers it to be a place that she's been to already. And I think she has some issues with distance even.
I think so, because when they did that episode where, again, spoilers, guys, when they did that episode where she was sick because she had used her powers, it's because they had gone so far. Mm-hmm. Like, they were so far away. And it was interesting that, like, they also said the part of the reason that she prefers it if she's seen it is that there have been times where she sent things through portals to places she hasn't seen and it's come out bad.
Yeah.
That poor squeak toy.
Poor squeak toy. She cut it in half.
In half. And it was smoking.
So, but I'm really intrigued by her character. You meet her on the very first episode, and she's running away. She's the first mutant that we see Thunderbird's team rescue. And you can tell she's scared, and there's some sort of backstory there of her family that's still shrouded in mystery that we don't understand. But I appreciate the actress and the way that she's playing out this character. And it's one of those things where you're like, you see, she's really playing out that character of, I've already been burned by the world, and I'm just trying to survive. Yeah. And then suddenly it comes to a place of hope. And what I appreciate, it wasn't like this, like, oh, we're all good. Yay, we're the Super Friends. Because that's a different universe altogether. But it's a matter of, she's skeptical of it. You could tell that she's been burned so much in the past that she's still kind of in reserve about things. And she's like still guarding herself, even though she's really in a safe environment. Yeah.
Well, for the most part.
For the most part.
I appreciate that it's not a honed skill. I also appreciate that we saw her and Thunderbird in Days of Future Past.
Yes.
Even though it was very brief, I feel like they were setting us up for this.
We're going to be talking about that on the flip side of this break, though. What are some aspects about Blink that you really enjoy?
I like her personality. Mm-hmm. Because while she's not the same as Polaris at all. She has this sense of humor that you're like, you've been through some stuff and come out on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's not as hopeful, like you said. She's not as optimistic, but I think she legitimately is starting to care about everyone.
Yeah.
And she legitimately wants to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's an aspect that, again, I see in society so much. Just because the people you and I have worked with over the years, there's so many people that have just been burned. But we see them, we're like, there really is something that they want to contribute. They want to do something right. They want to operate and be part of a group, but they've been so burned, they're scared to be part of a group. And so I'm really curious to see how she plays out.
Yes.
And speaking of playing out and the rest of how this series is going to play out, we're going to talk about that after this brief break. Are you a new business or ministry and need help getting your message out? Are you a budding artist who needs help sharing your passion with the world? Need help creating a social media presence that's impactful and represents who you are, but can't afford to have someone else run it for you all the time? One of my passions is to help people establish a social media presence so they can reach others with a message that encourages and changes lives. Not only do I want to help you create it, but I want to give you the skills so that you can maintain and grow your online presence. I offer a variety of services from graphic design to creating a social media campaign to consultation. If you're interested in my help, email me at geekdevotions@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. And we're back. So, for the second half of our podcast, we want to talk about the series moving forward. Some things we'd like to see happen, and some things that we don't want to see happen, if there are any things like that in our mindset. So, let's talk about the future of the show. Celeste, you mentioned some aspects of Polaris and Blink specifically that you would like to see played out. What are those things?
I would really like to see the relationship between her and Magneto played out. Or even... Between
Polaris and Magneto?
Yes.
Okay.
Even if it's more of a, I have this dad and I don't know who he is, I feel like that's a storyline the fans would appreciate. Mm-hmm. Is figuring out how well she knows him, how well she knows the fact that he's her father. Because, in one of the storylines, one of the children did not know he was their father. Mm-hmm. Because he didn't know. But in that one, they also circumvented Scarlet Witch. Mm-hmm. So, but I feel like that there's been hints of leaning towards bringing Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver in, and that also would be a connection to Magneto. So I feel like that would be kind of the same thing. Like, I want them to use her to get to them, basically. To bring them in, even if it's a flashback or it's something where they're really not there, but they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a really interesting aspect to bring in the rest of the known X-Men verse. I mean, if you know comics, the X-Men universe is ridiculously huge. There's so many mutants and sub-stories and plots and parallel dimensions, and I mean, it's crazy.
It's a little intimidating.
It really is. But because of movies of late, people have an idea of certain things. So it would be rather interesting to see them bring in the Brotherhood and the X-Men and bring in characters like Magneto, like Xavier, like Logan, or something, potentially the New Mutants. We just saw that preview a while back for the New Mutants, which is going to be kind of more of a thriller type of film. Yes, it's not your typical Marvel film.
But isn't that going to be on Hulu only?
I don't know. We'll have to look that up later.
Because then they might run into the networking issues.
Yeah, but to bring in, the aspects of that, those characters. Technically, the most recent Marvel movie, Logan, I say Marvel, Fox Marvel, it left off with the ability to do a New Mutants movie. Now, I don't think the New Mutants that we're going to see coming out soon is based off of that, or is an extension of that.
It's based off of another storyline. I know what book they're basing it off of. Mm-hmm. These children are, their parents, they are mutants, and their parents are bad guys.
No, that's the wrong series.
That's the wrong series?
Yeah, you're thinking of...
The Runaways.
The Runaways.
Oh.
Yeah, no, we're talking about the mutants.
What are you thinking of?
There was a preview that came out about 3 weeks ago for the New Mutants, and it was a thriller, horror-like movie that's coming out.
I remember this now.
Yeah. And so I don't think it's connected right off of Logan necessarily. I feel like Logan opened some doors for some very interesting different types of Marvel movies. They're not all going to be bright and shiny. We have other Marvel movies coming out, like there's going to be a Venom movie coming out.
Which will not be bright and shiny.
It will not be bright and shiny at all. But I'd be interested to see how they connect things, if they connect things, with the Gifted series. And I think Polaris would be a great jumping off because she already has such a connection to mainstay Marvel properties.
Yes.
But is that a good thing to bring in the rest of them? Or should they allow this to grow and be on its own?
I think that they could use it to bring in even more lesser known characters. Mm-hmm. Like you could use the we're running the underground so we see the ones that no one else sees to bring people in. But there were side storylines with Eric that didn't necessarily bring what am I trying to say? Didn't connect with the main group.
Mm. So you want this to be kind of like what they did with Supergirl. Supergirl, while she is technically a mainstay character in DC, she's not as much of a headliner as Superman. And so in the TV series, Supergirl, for the first season, you hear references of him. She'll mention him. You'll see reports of him, but you never see actual Superman until was it CW picked it up, and then even still, you only see Superman like once every couple of months.
Yeah, he's not a regular character, and yes, that is kind of because that then opens up for Lois Lane. That then opens up for what's his face over at the Daily Planet.
Perry White. It
opens up to bring in these characters who are not highlighted as much to be a part of the show.
So who would you want to see highlighted then in The Gifted if they go this route with connecting Polaris back to her father more directly?
I think it would be fun if they brought in Scarlet Witch and the Vision.
Okay.
Because at one point they got together. And I came in on some books that were after they were no longer together because something had happened to Vision and I'm not sure what.
Yeah.
And Scarlet Witch was kind of losing her mind.
Well, Scarlet Witch had caused some really bad stuff to happen to
Vision. This was I don't know if it was that, but this was like the House of M.
Yeah.
It was the beginning of House of M.
Yeah.
And she was stuck in this world where she and Vision were still married and they had this baby. And I feel like Vision is not a character that is as well known. So if we could pull him in even, that would be, like, he's known, but he's not. Mm-hmm. He's more known from the Marvel movies.
Right.
Which would then bring in the rest of the Marvel verse.
Sure. That'd be interesting. I guess the real question, though, is do they keep it within the Fox properties of Marvel, which is, of course, the X-Men Days of Future Past, which is kind of controversial as to whether or not people liked it. If you watch the Rogue cut version, it's much better film.
Makes much more sense.
Or even the X-Men Apocalypse was very controversial for a lot of folks as for liking it. So those films, should they bring it back into that property, even with Logan, with the ending the way Logan ended, or are we talking about MCU, where you have, again, this will take a lot of work, and there's rumors of Disney buying out Fox, and so bringing those in together is a possibility if the rumors are true. But does this property, The Gifted, belong in the MCU verse? Because it's very much grounded, while not directly into these other movies, stylistically, it's much more like Logan and the other movies.
It's much more gritty than the rest of Marvel. I think it would be interesting to see the Marvel universe going on in the style of the X-Men and the Gifted. I think that, having Bruce Banner pop up and help. Or even having Thor appear and somebody punching his lights out because he's kind of arrogant. At least in the comics. He is a little arrogant in the movies, but we have not seen Thor Ragnarok. This is not about that. Mm-hmm. So if there's anything in there about that, this is your disclaimer. We haven't seen it. We don't know.
Right.
So I think it would be interesting to see them combine the two, and maybe even do something similar to what Marvel had done with the Defenders, where everybody had their own color signature and everything looked a little different depending on what character they would focus. I feel like that would translate well into a movie if they were to bring in the X-Men into, say, the Avengers, to have the different lighting to help
highlight who
yeah. So I think it could be done. It's just a matter of, with so long apart, how could they feasibly graft them in now?
Yeah, it would definitely be an interesting feat to see them do it. I'm still not convinced though that it would be done easily. If you read comics and you read Marvel comics specifically, you have an understanding that not every book is written the exact same way, and there's a different feel to each book, and that's not on purpose because you have different writers. They're writing for different audiences, and so it almost makes sense to have separate things. But in comics, they are a connected universe. But what happens, though, is when you have the crossovers, you kind of have an awkwardness of it. Somebody has to give up their style. They have to give up their identity to fold into the main storyline. Now, when you have the crossovers, things change in different aspects. When Spider-Man's in somebody else's book, they tend to fold more to Spider-Man simply because he's a mainstay property. Whereas you have, let's say, the Punisher, if he goes into somebody else's property, yeah, he's gritty, but he's not as hardcore as he is in his own property, where he's much more adult-oriented. And so if this becomes a thing where they have the crossover, the Gifted into the MCU, whose style do you think would win out?
I think it would depend on what platform they're doing it. If, say they call Coulson out for something with the mutants, then if it's on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., then it should look like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. If it's on The Gifted, it should very much be The Gifted.
See, I think, though, Coulson himself...
Coulson kind of fits in everything.
With the way his character's drawn out... Because there is humor aspect, and this isn't just like I don't want people to think that this property is super like The Gifted is just super like straight stone face and like.
There is quite a bit of humor.
There's a lot of bit of humor. I laugh, and that's part of the reason why I love this series is that it is so rounded. There's drama, there's fear, there's suspense, and there's times of really some great humor that takes place in the series itself.
So I do think though that The Gifted would be harder than the rest of the universe to pull in unless they're going to pull the multiverse. Which I don't think it's called multiverse in Marvel, but you know what I'm talking about with the different worlds. If they did that, then it would make a little bit more sense as to why no one in the mutantverse has heard of Spider-Man and heard of Captain America.
Right.
Because at this point, that's one of the things I appreciate about the Marvel shows is that everyone knows about the Inhumans popping up. Everyone knows about the what happened in New York, what happened in Bulgaria. Not Bulgaria, but I don't remember where it was.
Latveria. Not Latveria.
Latveria is Doctor Doom.
Oh, anyways, move forward. All right. So, well, Celeste, do we have anything else we want to add to this conversation about moving forward with the show?
I think at this point it's strictly speculation until they make an announcement. Then we can kind of have some meat to go with to see how this is going to happen. It's
true. The one thing I would not mind is in Days of Future Past, we actually see Blink and Thunderbird.
Yes.
We see them in all their glory, I think. Personally, I thought they were great renditions of the characters. I wouldn't mind seeing some sort of combination of those two characters from Apocalypse. Not Apocalypse, from Days of Future Past, meshing with how they're doing the Gifted. I feel like that would be an interesting play out myself. The way the character designs are, and even the situation is like, maybe that might be the connector point to the Foxes is some sort of disruption where they see themselves as those characters.
See, and for me, I'm sitting here going, well, this is set before that. I didn't realize that that's a different universe.
Yeah, I mean, there's like the connection is not made there. There's people that would like to see it happen, but way that the Fox's Marvel universe is played out, everything's so jumbled right now because of the time travel, because of the events that took place in Apocalypse and whatnot. Everything's kind of a little bit different now.
Well, I thought that they were doing this show as a prequel to the events in Days of Future Past.
No.
That this was before the timeline change.
Right. From everything I've read, no. It's a possibility. It could be done that way. I feel like they took some of the good elements from Days of Future Past and put it in. Because you already have the issue, like, in Days of Future Past, you already had Sentinel, robots, giant robots. We don't see those right now.
Well, and that's why I thought it was a prequel. I thought that eventually those little, spider things were going to become
the majority of Future Past takes place, I think, in the 70s.
No. That's where they send Logan back to.
That's Days of Future Past.
Yes.
And he sees the robots already there.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
Yeah. So, but it'd be interesting to see them play that out down the road for sure.
Yes, most definitely.
Okay. Well, Celeste, tell our audience about next week. What's special about next week?
You get to meet my dad! I am so excited about this. My dad is coming and he's going to be a guest on Comm Talk, and we are going to talk about Star Trek.
Heck yes.
So, be looking forward to that.
Her dad is the ultimate Trekkie. He has been having her watch through, and as we've mentioned before several times, the entire Star Trek series according to Stardate. And
just the original series. And then we had to get through the movies, and now I'm trying to get through Next Generation.
Yes.
And if it wasn't for the fact that we got married, we would be going through Next Generation together, but we don't live together anymore, and we're still trying to get through James Bond, so, you know.
So should we not have gotten married?
That's not what I said. That is not what I said.
Oh, man.
Not at all what I said.
Oh, so be on the lookout for that, guys. It's going to be a great time next week. Before we wrap up, let's give you guys the results of our poll as to what is our Devoted Geek community's favorite power that they believe to be in existence in the Marvel Universe. And we actually have a tie. A two-way tie, and that is self-healing and magnetism. And we actually got into an interesting conversation, or I did at least, with one of our Devoted Geeks, Dale. And Dale had brought the aspect of never dying, and by disease or another person's hand, and having the opportunity to just wait for the Lord to call him home. And I was like, well, that's a great idea, but what about decapitation?
There can only be one.
How does this work out with self-healing and decapitation? Do you finally die or do you not die? And so it was an interesting conversation, and I want to hear your all's thoughts on this on the back end. Leave some comments. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave some comments down below. Answer this question for me. If you get decapitated and you have the self-healing, what happens? Does your head just reattach? Do you grow a new head? What happens to your other head? Does it grow a body? Is it still living? Let us know in the comments section or send us some messages on social media. That being said, thank you so much for taking time to listen to Comm Talk today. If you love this episode, do us a favor and head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's all very much appreciated and helps people to know that this is a podcast worth listening to. So, until next Sunday,
stay devoted.
Peace and love.